Some of Denver's homeless now have a safe place to call home. They are living in tiny homes.
A man in central Illinois named Matthew Stone was sleeping in a tent with his dog in the dead of winter. Temperatures dropped to 8 degrees below zero. He had no heat, no running water, and nothing between him and the cold except thin canvas and every piece of clothing he owned layered on top of himself. Then, 3 days before the worst cold snap of the season, a tiny home community opened its doors in Bloomington. Matthew walked in, got his own private cabin with a lock on the door, and his dog Tank came with him. But this wasn't a one-off rescue story in one small city. Over 100 communities across America are building entire villages of tiny homes specifically designed to get people off the streets. And the results are so striking that cities are being forced to completely rethink how they deal with homelessness. The question is whether tiny homes are a real solution or just a feel-good band-aid on a crisis that keeps getting worse. To understand why these villages are popping up everywhere, you first need to understand how broken the traditional system actually is. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, more than 770,000 people experienced homelessness across the United States in the most recent national count. That includes families with young children, elderly people, veterans, and young adults aging out of foster care. The go-to solution for decades has been congregate shelters, big open rooms with rows of beds or cots. For some people, that works fine as a temporary stop. But for the chronically homeless, people who have been living on the streets for a year or more, who often deal with severe mental illness or substance addiction, traditional shelters frequently make things worse. A woman named Barb Oliver, who spent years building tiny homes for homeless people in Seattle, put it simply. She said homelessness is not about a lack of a home. Homelessness is about a lack of community. And shelters, as well-intentioned as they are, do not build community. They warehouse people. Think about it from the perspective of someone who's been sleeping outside for 5 years. You don't trust anyone. You spend every waking moment thinking about two things: what you're going to eat and where you're going to sleep tonight. If you leave your belongings to go look for work, everything you own will probably be stolen by the time you get back. And here's a statistic that flips the whole narrative. According to research from the University of Southern California, roughly 70% of homeless people who use drugs didn't start using until after they became homeless. The streets create the addiction, not the other way around. When winter hits, the danger becomes life-threatening. Children lose body heat 4 times faster than adults. People sleeping outside in freezing rain and wind face real risks of hypothermia and frostbite. In Buffalo, in 2022, dozens of people froze to death during a blizzard, some of them trapped in their own vehicles. That's the reality these tiny home villages are trying to address. Not just putting a roof over someone's head, but rebuilding the support structure that most of us take for granted. And the biggest, most ambitious example is happening on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. It is called Community First Village, and it started with one man. Alan Graham was a former real estate developer who did something nobody in his position would normally consider. Starting in 2003, he spent over 250 nights sleeping alongside homeless men and women in Austin, not observing from a boardroom, actually sleeping on cardboard on cold concrete. What he found surprised him. The people he met were not lazy. They had work ethic, they had skills. What they did not have was anyone around them who cared. In 2012, Graham secured 27 acres of land outside Austin's city limits. By 2015, the first residents moved in. Today, Community First Village is home to more than 470 formerly homeless people, and the nonprofit Graham founded, Mobile Loaves and Fishes, has acquired additional land that will bring the total footprint to 178 acres and roughly 1,900 homes when fully built out. That would be enough to permanently house about half of Austin's entire chronically homeless population. No other project in the country has attempted anything close to that scale. And the design is incredibly intentional. Every single home has a front porch because Graham figured out early on that front porches are where relationships happen. Homes are grouped into clusters of 40 to 50 units around shared outdoor kitchens, gardens, and laundry rooms. They call it the neighborhoods of knowingness model. Put a few dozen people together with shared green space between their front doors, and they cannot avoid running into each other. A wave, a conversation, someone knocking on your door to check if you are okay. That is how community forms. What makes Community First different from most other villages is that it is designed as permanent housing, not transitional shelter. Residents are not passing through. Many plan to live there for the rest of their lives, and they are expected to contribute. Everyone pays rent, scaled to what they can afford. The village generates over $1.2 million a year through its own micro-businesses, including an art studio with kilns for pottery and a jewelry station that collaborates with the Austin jewelry brand Kendra Scott. There is an auto repair shop where residents fix cars and do state inspections. There is even a tiny home hotel near the entrance where visitors to Austin can book overnight stays, and residents help run the whole operation. The retention rate speaks for itself. About 88% of residents stay in the village once they move in. Compare that to traditional shelters where turnover is constant and repeat homelessness is the norm. Graham calls his philosophy housing first, community always. Give people a safe place to live, surround them with others who understand what they have been through, and then watch what happens. At the 10-year anniversary celebration in October 2025, Austin Mayor Kirk Watson stood in front of the assembled residents and said the village represented something nobody believed was possible when it started. But Community First isn't the only village making waves, and the model spreading across the country doesn't look the same everywhere, because different cities face different problems. Since 2019, the number of tiny home villages in the United States has nearly quadrupled, jumping from 34 to over 124, according to research from Missouri State University. Dozens more are under construction right now. In Seattle, the Low-Income Housing Institute operates more than a dozen villages across the city, but their approach is fundamentally different from Austin's. These are transitional shelters designed as stepping stones toward permanent housing rather than a final destination. Seattle's villages report that over half of their residents eventually move into permanent housing. The model works, but it solves a different piece of the puzzle. Then you look at Minneapolis, where a converted warehouse called Avivo Village houses 100 people in tiny private dwellings. Since opening in December 2020, Avivo Village has served over 850 individuals, and 343 of them have moved onto safe, permanent housing. What makes Avivo different is the barrier to entry, or rather, the lack of one. You do not need to be sober. You do not need to pass a background check. You just need to be willing to come inside. It operates on what is called a housing first and harm reduction model, and the numbers suggest that meeting people where they are, instead of demanding they clean up first, actually produces better outcomes. But even with these successes stacking up across the country, there is a much bigger argument that cities cannot ignore. And it comes down to money. Building permanent supportive housing in a city like Los Angeles costs an average of nearly $600,000 per unit. That is not a typo. Almost $600,000 for a single apartment. Some projects have exceeded $800,000 per door. A tiny home, depending on the design, can be built for anywhere from $11,000 to $50,000. When you factor in full infrastructure costs, including site preparation, sewer lines, power hookups, and shared facilities, the average total construction cost per bed in a Los Angeles tiny home village came out to about $42,000. Compare those two numbers, and the math is overwhelming. And there is another figure that seals it. A chronically homeless person costs taxpayers an estimated $35,000 a year through emergency room visits, police interactions, jail time, and other crisis services. When those same individuals are placed in supportive housing, those costs drop by nearly 50%. The villages do not just save money on construction, they save money on everything downstream. If you are finding this useful, take a second and hit that subscribe button. We break down stories like this every week, and the next one is going to be just as eye-opening. So with all these success stories and all these cost savings, it would be easy to paint tiny home villages as a perfect solution, but the reality on the ground is more complicated, and ignoring the challenges does not help anyone. The biggest obstacle, by far, is neighborhood resistance. The "not in my backyard" problem is real, and it kills projects. When city officials propose building a tiny home village, nearby residents show up at council meetings, worried about property values, safety, and what kind of people will be living next door. In some cities, these concerns have delayed or completely eliminated projects that already had funding and land lined up. Then there are the zoning issues. Many cities have minimum lot size requirements and building codes that were not written with 200 square foot homes in mind. Getting permits can take months or years. Community First Village in Austin partly sidestepped this by building outside the city limits, where Texas has no discretionary land use authority. Not every project has that option. There are also legitimate questions about whether tiny homes are a dignified long-term solution. Most tiny homes in village settings do not have private bathrooms or kitchens. Residents share communal facilities, which works well for some people and feels institutional to others. Housing advocates from the National Alliance to End Homelessness have argued that tiny homes should be one part of a broader strategy, not a replacement for building actual affordable housing. And then there's weather. Many of these structures, especially the lower-cost models used in transitional villages, are essentially insulated sheds. They are a massive step up from a tent, but they are not designed to handle extreme cold the way a fully insulated apartment would be. During harsh winters, residents still rely on portable heaters and extra blankets. Organizations working with vulnerable populations in places like Minneapolis and Denver have started distributing compact thermal bivies, like the ones from TerraShell, that trap body heat in an enclosed reflective shell without needing batteries or electricity. Outreach teams have found them especially useful during the transition period when someone has been offered housing but has not physically moved in yet. If you want to check those out for your own emergency kit, the link is in the description. But here is what even the critics tend to agree on. The alternative to tiny home villages is usually not permanent affordable housing. The alternative is nothing. The streets, a tent under an overpass, and when you frame it that way, the conversation shifts completely. The part of these villages that actually matters most has nothing to do with the buildings. It is the people inside them. Barb Oliver described it from her experience at Camp Second Chance in Seattle. The fence around the village, which neighbors assumed existed so they would not have to look at homeless people, actually served the opposite purpose. It protected residents from the harassment and violence that people on the streets face every single day, things that housed people can barely imagine. Inside that fence, residents found something they had not experienced in years: a community that noticed them. Each village is self-governed. Residents meet weekly to establish rules, resolve conflicts, and plan events. They take turns doing security shifts, cleaning common areas, and checking on each other. Oliver recalled hearing residents knock on each other's doors just to say, "Hey, I have not seen you in a while. Are you doing okay?" For someone who spent years being completely invisible, that simple act of being noticed changes everything. At Community First Village, a resident named Blair Racine talked about the transformation in terms that would sound exaggerated if the data did not support them. He said the biggest problem homeless people face comes down to self-esteem. When you rebuild that, when people start feeling good about who they are, you watch them change their lives. Alan Graham himself moved into Community First Village with his wife, leaving behind the wealthy Westlake neighborhood in Austin, where they had lived for 34 years. He calls it the best neighborhood he has ever lived in. When you walk through the village, he says, you better not be in a hurry. People are always outside, always stopping to chat, always building those small connections that make a place feel alive. And that points to something that goes beyond housing policy. The residents did not just need walls and a roof. They needed a porch to sit on. They needed someone to knock on their door. The villages work because they treat isolation as the core problem and connection as the core fix. There is something uncomfortable in that truth for the rest of us too. The distance between being housed and being homeless is thinner than people want to believe. A job loss, a medical emergency, a bad month. 70% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, according to recent surveys. One serious crisis, and the safety net disappears. That is why basic preparedness matters on a personal level. Not in a doomsday bunker kind of way, but in a practical, common-sense kind of way. Know your local shelter options, keep an emergency kit in your car, and have a thermal bivvy like a TerraShell stashed in your glove box or your go bag. Small moves that cost almost nothing can make a real difference when things go sideways. The link is down in the description if you want to take a look. As of right now, the tiny home village movement is at an inflection point. Cities that were skeptical 3 years ago are now actively scrambling to build their own. The success of Community First Village, Avivo Village, and the Bridge in Bloomington has created a blueprint that other communities can follow. Travis County officials say that when leaders from across the country visit Austin, the number one thing they want to see is the tiny homes. The path forward is not simple. Zoning laws need to change. Funding needs to become more predictable. And tiny homes need to be understood as one tool in a much bigger toolbox, not a silver bullet that replaces the hard work of building real affordable housing. But something is shifting. The conversation has moved from, should we try this, to how fast can we build more? And for people like Matthew Stone, who spent the worst winter of his life in a frozen tent in central Illinois with his dog Tank, the question was never really about the size of the home. It was about whether anyone cared enough to offer one. If this story hit home for you, check out the video on screen right now. It digs into another community that's solving an impossible problem in a way nobody saw coming.